Forest Bank prison wings locked down after fight ends with inmate being slashed across the face. Now this is the first story on prison news today. Now if you're new to my channel, people, what I'm doing is a few times a week uploading prison news, what I get through to me app on a daily basis, because a lot of the news that I get through on my app isn't on mainstream media. It's mostly just on this app, or it's across the newspapers. But the ordinary person sitting at home doesn't really hear about these stories unless they're flicking through something like this, and it's never on your normal Sky News or BBC News. So I'm bringing you all the latest news from in the prisons. So the Forest Bank prison's been locked down after a fight ends with an inmate being slashed across the face. Now in prison slang, when you see someone with a big scar down the face, they call it a Mars bar, which is rhyming for scar, Mars bar, scar. If someone will say, go and give him a Mars bar, it means go and slash him. Or if you say he's got a big old Mars bar down his face, it means he's got a big nasty scar where he's been striped down his face. But I'm surprised this has actually made the headlines in the news, because this happens on a daily basis across a lot of the prisons throughout the UK. So two wings at Forest Bank in Salford were locked down after a fight ended with an inmate being slashed across the face. The drama happened on Sunday night. One prison source said it was a result of heightened tensions between rival gangs. But Forest Bank is a privately run prison, and the private prisons tend to have a lot more violence and a lot more drugs and dramas going on than what the government-run prisons are. So officials at the Under Fire privately run prison said the prison regime is operating normally. One source at the Salford prison said wings E2 and H2 went into lockdown following a big gang fight in which two inmates were said to have been hurt. One was said to have been slashed across his face and was taken to hospital. The prison, operated by facilities management giant Sodexo, for on behalf of the Ministry of Justice as part of a £1 billion contract, has faced calls for it to be brought back under state control and for an official review after an investigation revealed a dangerous jail where cost-cutting managers have lost control. So again, if you're trying to run a prison and you hand it over to a private firm, and the only thing the private firm is interested in, if you give a prison to a private firm, the private firm is only interested in making money because it's private and they're making money out of the prisoners working in the prison workshops. So their number one priority isn't the prisoners, it's money. It's not the prisoners' safety and well-being, it's to make money out of the prisoners. So for me, privately run jails should be handed back into government hands so they run better, because these prisons are out of control, and it's like I've mentioned, it's safety for the prisoners, not only the staff, the prisoners as well. So today's prison officials refused to confirm details of any injuries, but they did say one inmate required treatment. An HMP Forest Bank spokesperson said, "We can confirm an altercation between two prisoners took place on Sunday, resulting in one prisoner needing treatment. It is normal practice that a wing is locked up following an incident to allow for operational assessment. We can confirm that the prison regime is operating normally. This incident is now subject to a police investigation, so it wouldn't be appropriate to comment any further at this time." Earlier today, a spokeswoman for Greater Manchester Police said they had not been informed of any incident at the prison. An investigation into Forest Bank uncovered allegations of widespread drug use on inmates who run the wings, prompting an MP and Salford's mayor to write to the government to demand an urgent review. Our revelations included a call from Salford and Eccles MP Rebecca Long-Bailey for the Ministry of Justice to cancel a £1 billion contract it has with Sodexo to run the troubled jail. She and Salford City Mayor Paul Dennett also wrote a joint letter to Justice Secretary Alex Chalk to demand an urgent investigation, and if this confirms the allegations in our report, for the privately run prison to be brought under government control. Among the allegations were drugs or rife smuggled in via legal letters and inmates off their tits a lot of the time. Inmates brew their own hooch. Violence is commonplace and inmates run the wings. Staff feel unsafe and lone guard can be left to guard 100 inmates at a time. Staff have to buy their own uniform because of cost cutting. A desperate father paid off a drug dealer on his addict son's wing because staff didn't protect him. Sodexo's contract to run the prison ends in January the 19th, 2025. Back in 1998, it was awarded a deal worth £1 billion to design, build and run the prison built on the site of the former Agecroft power station under a private finance initiative to house a maximum of 1,064 inmates. The deal was to last 25 years before being extended. So again, like I've mentioned, privately run prisons seem to be a lot more chaotic than the government run prisons, and it's normal practice to lock a wing down or a couple of wings down when somebody is slashed in prison or attacked with a weapon, because in the prisons that I've been in, more so when I was in Franklin High Security Prison, when somebody was attacked in that prison, they normally locked the full jail down. Sometimes it was for 3 and 4 days at a time, while they went and searched every single pad in the prison looking for contraband and weapons. So moving on to the next prison, which is Pentonville Prison down in North London. And Pentonville Prison is an old Victorian prison. And the reason why it's in the headlines, it's saying Pentonville Prison is unfit and inhumane for inmates. The population of the North London prison surged to nearly 1,150 inmates, far exceeding its intended capacity. Prisoners were kept in cells measuring 12 foot by 8 foot, often in twos, with bunk beds, a chair, a desk, an open toilet inches from where they ate and slept. Well, that's just typical of the old Victorian prison, because Durham Prison is exactly the same. There's 2 men to a pad, and you can put your hands out like that and touch the walls. That's how small the pads are. And at the end of the bed, or in the middle of the pad sometimes, they've got the toilet where you both have to use it, and it's quite degrading and horrible having to share a pad with someone and having to go to the toilet in front of them, or your pad mate doing it in front of you, because you can imagine in a pad that small the stench that comes off. But if your pad mate is courteousy enough to do what you call is the shit and flush, where your pad mate, if you have a shite, quickly flush the toilet as it's coming out, so as you can imagine it flushes straight away and the stench isn't as bad. So the report says the lack of privacy alone could not be described as decent or humane. Pentonville's Independent Monitoring Board said there were issues with water, heating and vermin due to the prison's Victorian-era infrastructure. It found a lift serving the vulnerable prisoner unit did not work, which raised safety concerns, particularly for older prisoners who were forced to navigate narrow metal stairs. The report said a lack of hot water, heating and low water pressure were reported regularly due to the antiquated system, which does not allow for cells to be isolated when repairs are being carried out, often for damage caused by prisoners. There were at least 2 occasions when drain blockages caused sewage to erupt through a manhole at lower ground level, causing extremely unpleasant conditions in the care and separation unit. The lift, which serves for the VPU, remained out of action. Some of the older, frail men had to navigate flights of narrow metal stairs to breathe fresh air. This was a safety risk for both prisoners and staff, adding an accident waiting to happen. The IMB Pentonville chairwoman Alice Goddard said it was disappointing the prison's population has continued to increase despite detailed evidence of the detrimental effect this would have on prisoners. For the second year running, we received more calls from prisoners to the IMB helpline than any other prison in England and Wales. Despite the hard work of staff and management, Pentonville remains an unfit place for prisoners to live or to be rehabilitated. The report also highlighted some success in the prison, including the curbing of contraband and a neurodiversity wing. Monitors conducted their report between the 1st of April 2022 and the 31st of March 2023. A spokesperson said HMP Pentonville has taken urgent action to address some of the issues raised in the report. This includes major refurbishments to boost capacity and launching new training and education programs so prisoners can turn away from crime for good. The government is also pressing ahead with the biggest expansion of prison places in over a century, delivering 20,000 additional spaces, including 6 new modern jails. Well, it's the first time I've heard that because I've been researching up and I've told a few stories about the state of the prisons, especially the old Victorian ones. And the majority of local prisons in all of the major cities throughout the country, like the likes of Durham, Strangeways, the old Victorian prisons have been around since the 1800s and they're not fit for purpose any longer. So it's only right that they should be building what they would call supermax prisons, not supermax as in supermax security, but supermax for the super maximum capacity. And they should be building modern prisons. They should be building them all over the place. They should have enough spaces for 100,000 inmates. I mean, the capacity, I think, at the minute is 85,000 or 90,000 inmates. But they should be building massive prisons with massive pads that houses just one person so everyone can have their own space, because you can't get rehabilitated when you're in a pad with somebody else when you've got to deal with them and their personality, as well as your own personal issues. You can't finally settle into prison and be your own person, gather your own thoughts until you're actually in a single man cell. And that is what they need to do. They need to build massive prisons, put loads of training facilities inside of them, and try and get people into employment ready for release and different things. Otherwise, there's just going to be no rehabilitation whatsoever. So this moves us on to the next headline, which is Exeter prison failures linked to prisoner's death. So failures by prison staff contributed to the suicide of 39-year-old Stuart Stanley at HMP Exeter, according to a jury inquest, leading to the coroner. Devon's senior coroner is urging changes to be made at HMP Exeter after failures by prison staff were said to have contributed to the 39-year-old prisoner. A jury inquest into the death of Stuart Stanley while on remand concluded it was probably caused or contributed by a failure to follow processes, resulting in the staff best qualified to appreciate Mr. Stanley's risk to himself being excluded from the decision to remove him from constant watch. So the constant watch is when a prisoner is on suicide watch. They're on constant watch, which is 24/7. So they've normally got a constant watch cell where a prison officer is stationed outside the pad, and normally there's a perspex door so they can see straight inside. This is normally when a prisoner's already tried to take their life, so they're on constant watch to make sure that they cannot take their life. So he's obviously just been took off constant watch when he's actually took his life. So the jury have also found that the multidisciplinary process in place were adequate. However, they were not fully complied with in this case. Following the inquest into his death, which took place at Exeter's Coroner Court between July the 17th and July the 27th, Coroner Philip Spinney has issued a prevention of future deaths report to the Governor of Exeter Prison. It states that on June the 23rd, 2020, Mr. Stanley was remanded in custody to HMP Exeter, and an assessment care in custody and teamwork plan was opened. Now in prison, in short, it's called ACT. So when a prisoner is put on an ACT, it means that this action plan is put into place and they keep an eye on them to assess, to see what duty of care they need. And it says an action plan was opened due to low mood, anxiety, and a previous suicide attempt by hanging. That plan was closed the next day. On July the 4th, he was assaulted by another inmate while in the shower. 3 days later, Mr. Stanley was moved to the same wing as the suspected perpetrator. Just 5 days after the attack, and having expressed concerns to his family about his safety, on the night of July the 9th, his cellmate found him seemingly trying to hang himself. He alerted prison staff, who started prison service suicide and self-harm prevention procedures known as the ACT. Mr. Stanley was put under constant supervision and was moved to a special cell that allowed an officer to observe him continuously. He was noted by staff to be paranoid and erratic and maintained that he was under the threat from other prisoners. A day later, on July the 11th, after a case review, it was decided that constant supervision should end, and Mr. Stanley was put on observations at least once every half an hour during the evening. The decision was made without input from healthcare staff in the prison, contrary to HMP Exeter's policy. At around 1:20 a.m. on July the 12th, the night patrol officer found Mr. Stanley hanging. He died at the Royal Devon and Exeter Hospital on July the 14th. The jury heard evidence from Mr. Stanley's family, who had contacted the prison on several occasions to express the concern about his safety and well-being. They described him as a caring and loving person and said that they did not wish another family to go through what they had following his death. In the Prevention of Future Deaths report dated September the 19th, Mr. Spinney said, during the course of the inquest, the evidence revealed matters giving rise to concern. In my opinion, there is a risk that future deaths will occur unless action is taken. In the circumstances, it is my statutory duty to report to you. The matters of concern listed in the report were an inconsistent approach taken by staff when conducting and recording observations on prisoners subject to the prison service suicide and self-harm prevention procedures known as ACT. Some officers had a different interpretation of the requirements in respect of timing and observations. Precise times of observations were not routinely recorded accurately. A prison officer worked 23 hours out of 24, and when he was asked if this was normally, replied yes, to make the regime work. Mr. Spinney concluded consideration should be given to reviewing the process of conducting and recording ACT observations to ensure accuracy and compliance with relevant procedure and relevant policy and guidance. Consideration should also be given to reviewing staffing levels, retention and recruitment to ensure the efficient and safe running of the prison. In my opinion, action should be taken to prevent future deaths, and I believe you and your organisation have the power to take such action. The Governor has until November the 16th to respond to the report, either spelling out what steps were being taken or explaining why it is felt that no further action is needed. But again, like I've mentioned in the previous story about violence in the prisons, suicides in the prisons is a massive problem. The number of suicides throughout the prisons is enormous, and a lot of IPP prisoners have actually taken their own lives. But again, more needs to be done to look after these type of prisoners, because a staggering amount of prisoners are taking their own lives where these could be stopped. They should have, like I've mentioned about the Pentonville, when they're building these massive prisons, they need to have more healthcare wings where they can have people who are suicidal like this. They can have round-the-clock care, given the correct treatment and given the correct care to stop them from going and taking their own lives, because these couldn't be prevented. And life is precious. You only get one life, and these people should have the care that they need. I've done a story yesterday on a young lass that took her life in HMP Parliament, another one that could have been saved. But I don't know the reasons why Mr. Stanley was in prison, but he was only on remand, and he might have been somebody who can't look after himself in prison, and he's been bullied and intimidated, and he feels like there's no other way out apart from taking his life, which could have been prevented. But I'll leave that one there for now, people. Hopefully you are enjoying the content. Remember to like and subscribe. Take care, everyone.